despite what the fake news will go ahead and tell you. You go ahead and you look at the tax cuts, you look at everything else. I mean, Americans are richer, healthier, and happier. And Democrats, their approval ratings are going, beneath that of roaches, alligators, and AIDS.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competition, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and you're listening to episode number 129, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Check them out today at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST, all one word, ARMEDPODCAST, and get 10% off your order. That's cooksholsters.com. Welcome to the show. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week. I'm really glad you could join me again today. How was your week? Was it warm? It's hotter than a 4-ball monkey here in Texas. As I record this, it's after 6 o'clock, it's almost 7, and we're still at 106 degrees. We're near the tail end of a 10-day, 100-plus degree stretch. I think Tuesday is supposed to cool off. Should be a lot more comfortable, just 97 on Tuesday. So way too hot for me to get out and shoot, and unless you're one of these die-hard shooters, which I am not, it's not a good time for me to get out and shoot. The best time here to get out and shoot is between 6 a.m. and 11 a.m. After that, hobbits start throwing rings in your yard because they think they've reached Mount Doom. At least it's a dry heat, right? All right. Anyway, quick announcement before we get started. We've got our monthly Reformation Gun Club hangout coming up on Thursday night, July 26th at 8:30 p.m. Central. This month's guest is Pastor John Bennett. We've mentioned it in the previous weeks. If you'd like to join us live, sign up for the Reformation Gun Club. For just $2 per month, you get access to lots of awesome content, member discounts, and invites to our monthly hangouts with the cast. Oh, and just wanted to say thank you and welcome to our newest members. Robert Meyer, Russell Wells, and David Dunn are our newest Reformation Gun Club members. Really appreciate your support. I hope you'll join them. Go to gunclub.armedlutheran.us and sign up today and join us on Thursday when we visit with Pastor Bennett. So what have we got going on the show today? We've got tips from Mia about how to cure that flinch when you're shooting. Sergeant Bill has tips for shooting far distant targets. And Aaron's self-defense tip is about what to do when you hear gunshots. And we've got something special. Remso Martinez is the host of the Remso Republic podcast on the Self-Defense Radio Network. He is a journalist, a podcaster, a documentary film producer, and now he's the author of the best-selling book on Amazon, Stay Away from the Libertarians. He's going to join us today to talk about his career, ghost hunting of all things, politics, and his new book. So stick around. We got a lot of great content coming your way after this brief timeout. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Hey guys, just a quick message here. The fights going on to protect our rights seem to be endless. The left likes to complain about all the money involved in politics and how the NRA has bought and paid for all of these politicians in Washington. The truth is that the anti-gun lobby has very deep pockets as well, funding those efforts to take away your rights. And that's why I recommend that you fight for your rights by joining one or more of the national organizations that fight for your rights every day. You'll find links to those organizations where you can join and support the fight. Join the NRA. The NRA is not perfect, and no organization is. I've got my disagreements with some of the things at the NRA, but I am a life member, and I always will be. I would recommend you join as well. I am a life member of the Second Amendment Foundation. If you want to see the lawsuits against the anti-gunners go forward, support the Second Amendment Foundation. And I'm a life member of the Gun Owners of America. If you want a real no-compromise group, join the GOA. All three of those organizations, their links are on my website at armedlutheran.us. Look for the Fight for Your Rights section in the sidebar on the right. Click and join all of those groups. Join your local organizations as well, your state organizations. They need your support, and they're fighting for your rights at the local level as well. Be sure to get in the fight. Don't sit by and let everybody else do it for you. The fight never ends. So be sure to join the national and state organizations that fight for your rights every day.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's been a good week over here. I hope it has been for you as well. Last week, I kind of talked to you a little bit about the brass technique and making your shots on target better when you're shooting with a rifle. And today I wanted to expand on that a little bit. I wanted to talk to you about recoil and shooting flinch because that's a big issue for quite a few people and something that actually you can work through if you practice. So with hunting season just around the corner, if you've been to the range and you've noticed that your shot groups aren't consistent, they're not in a nice tight group, it could be due to the development of the bad habit of shooting flinch. In sighting in with a friend, I noticed that she had developed a flinch and she was anticipating that recoil while she was shooting her rifle, which significantly reduced her accuracy on target. Her shots were all over the place. If you're having a similar problem or somebody that you're working with is having a similar problem, there are a couple of teaching techniques that you can try to help reduce flinch. Shooters, when they feel the recoil, it punches the butt of the rifle into their shoulder. It's most recognizable when we shoot from a bench or a prone position because you're stationary. If you're in a kneeling or squatting position, you've got other aspects to deal with, and sometimes you don't notice that recoil as much. But if recoil isn't addressed, it can lead to some really bad habits, which in turn carry on into the field, and they can really ruin a hunt. Bad shots are no fun. So we want to practice and have the best shots possible. Some habits that a shooter can develop while they're at the range is closing their eyes. They can start pulling or jerking the trigger, or they can start sitting back or pulling away from the gun just as they pull the trigger in anticipation. And these bad habits will cause their shots to rarely hit the zone where they're aiming. So start by shooting from a bench or a lead sled to hold the gun in place so that they can get used to the sound of the gunshot, because sometimes people just flinch simply at the sound. I mean, think about it. When you're behind the spotting scope, do you not flinch a little when you hear the gunshot? So start out at the bench and get comfortable with the gun. Make sure that it's sighted in, that the scope is on target, or if you're using open sights, make sure that you're on target from that bench. And that way you will know that if it's on target and sighted in, then it's definitely the shooter, not the gun. So one thing that you can do to help a shooter is to add a shoulder pad or a puffy jacket or vest. This will make some padding behind the gun. Another thing that you can do is purchase an extended butt pad for the rifle. These will absorb a great amount of that recoil between the gun stock and the shooter's shoulder. But one thing you need to remember is that this will change that length of pull for the shooter. So you definitely need to test out the trigger finger's reach before you go to live fire. And this is really something that needs to be done before the hunt anyhow, because as we're out hunting in different seasons, we probably will be having different layers of clothing on depending on the weather conditions. With the added padding between the rifle and the shoulder, that anticipation of pain may be reduced. So if that's what they're feeling is the pain of the recoil, then you can reduce that with some padding. And with that recoil anticipation out of the way, you might start to notice other issues. It may not have been the issue of that stock hitting the shoulder. So some things that people do, I mentioned before, is that bad habit of closing their eyes. Or another one is that reflex of sitting back, and closing their eyes is kind of like the flinch. I mean, you close your eyes because you're scared. It's a reflex. Sitting back from the gun is when shooters, they pull away because they don't want to get hit by the stock. But in essence, what happens when you pull away is it causes the gun to hit harder because there's that space between the gun and the shoulder. So it actually increases the felt recoil if you sit back from the gun. So you've got to teach them to sit into the gun, which I talked about last week. You can work on relaxing during the shot as well. You can follow the brass technique that I mentioned last week. So the breathing techniques, take in a deep breath and slowly exhale, then hold it for a pause as you squeeze the trigger. Look for that shot on target, and you can shoot at larger targets instead of aiming for a really small point on a bullseye. Shoot at a large paper or an animal shaped target with kill zone and aim for that kill zone instead of just aiming for a dot. It actually can help some shooters relax because some people simply get target panic. They get nervous and they try too hard, which causes them to shoot worse. So using a target with a kill zone may be helpful. Work on trigger control. If you work on slowly taking up that slack on the trigger to prevent any pulling or jerking of the shots, learn to pull that trigger slow and steady, and then be surprised as that trigger breaks and the shot flies. That's something that's really important. Try shooting from various shooting positions. I mean, when you're out in the field, you're going to be having to shoot from different scenarios. So try shooting from the shooting bench and then transition to sitting positions, kneeling positions, standing position, and even work on shooting sticks or using a log as a rest, different things like that. This actually can provide a new focus so that the focus isn't on the anticipation of the shot, but rather on your form and how you're supporting the gun. So it can take away that mindset of waiting for the recoil. You can also create shooting scenarios. Have a partner, so if you're the one shooting, then have a partner with you, or if you're helping someone else. Talk through the shots. For example, you can say something like this: the elk just walked out. He's broadside. He's clear. Take the shot whenever you're ready. By doing that, you're walking somebody through just as a hunting guide would kind of walk through a shot. It can give them a scenario where you're in charge and they're not just randomly smacking that trigger and just trying to get the bullet down range. It'll give them more time to focus on good habits before the shot. If you get good at that, something else you can do is walk them through another scenario, which is a reload scenario, which is very important because oftentimes you're going to need a second shot if your first one didn't hit the mark. And some people get thrown up in cycling their bolt. So work on a reload always. Even if it's the one shot scenario, reload that bolt every time so that you're ready to go for the second shot. When you're done, remember to put the safety on. Remember, eject rounds if you're done and you're going off the range. Keep safety in mind the whole way, but to walk your partner through, you can say something similar to as, you're going to shoot once. Quickly throw the bolt, reload. The elk didn't fall down, reacquire your target and shoot again. That's something that people have to work on, is reacquiring a target through the scope. If they're not very good at using a scope, they're definitely going to need to practice that. So rehearsing scenarios, it'll help develop the reflexes for real life hunting situations, but it also takes the shooter's mind off of recoil and it can help them become much better shooters. So with practice and added confidence of shots that are grouped better, we can reduce that shooting flinch. And another thing to note is that you should probably shoot a minimal number of rounds so that the shooter doesn't become sore or tired. So do this in doses. Don't do all of this in one day. Take some different days to go to the range before hunting season. And if you're preparing with a hunting rifle, a high caliber rifle, 6 rounds may be plenty. Don't overdo it. Let yourself or let the shooter leave the range in a comfortable position, not with a sore shoulder. And you will be happy to be working on better groupings instead of evading that dreaded shooting flinch and other bad habits. Have a great week. Talk to you next time.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
If you follow Mia on Facebook, you know that she loves her morning coffee. The official Dunkin' Donuts shop provides coffee lovers with everything they need, from K-Cup pods, original blend coffee, tea, drinkware, and more. Shop today at www.armedlutheran.us/coffee and help support Armed Lutheran Radio. Hey, if you're like me, you like shopping at gun shows. No pressure from sales staff, no need to bother them to ask to look at stuff. You just pick stuff up and dry fire it and look at it and hold it. Imagine if you could get that experience at your local gun store, where you don't need to bother anybody. You don't have to ask people for help if you don't need it. You don't have salespeople hovering over your shoulders. Well, this is what it's like when you shop at G4G Guns. Cassie and Patrick Coburn are the owners, and you've heard them on the program before. They are absolutely awesome people, and they'll help you find exactly the right gear for you. But there's no sales pressure. You just browse the store, you pick up and hold anything that you want to look at without asking permission, just like at the gun show. And once you've found the gun you want, or if you actually do need assistance, Patrick and Cassie are there to help. It's the best of both worlds, gun shop and gun show, in one place. It really is the best. G4G Guns. They're located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. They're open Mondays from 1 to 6, Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7, and on the weekends you'll find them at a gun show near you. Or check them out online at G4G Guns. That's G4G guns.com. G4G Guns, the gallery for great guns. G4GGuns.com.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense, here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week's tip is, if it sounds like gunshots, assume it is gunshots and go into evade, barricade, respond mode immediately. Do not try to rationalize whether or not you just heard gunshots. If you read about active shooters in a lot of these situations, a lot of people say things like, I thought I heard fireworks, or there was this weird popping noise and I thought it was part of the show. If you hear weird popping noises or fireworks when you're not at a fireworks show, then don't assume or try to rationalize that it's something benign. Assume that it's gunshots and start going through those evade, barricade, respond principles that we talk about. Try to get out of the situation if you can. Try to find cover if you can't get out of it. Try to make it harder for the bad guy to get to where you are, and start looking for ways that you can get out of that situation. So do not assume that loud popping noises are anything but gunshots when you're in the public space. And if you don't know what gunshots sound like, you need to go to the range and hear them both outdoors and indoors. Greg Ellifritz wrote an article on active response training about the importance of recognizing gunshots, and you have to realize that gunshots sound different inside of a building than they do out on a public range where you're in an open air type situation. If you ever been to a public range where it's indoors, then you know that it sounds a lot different when those gunshots are being fired than it does when you're outside. So you need to understand that there's some differences there and be able to recognize it. But all in all, trust your instincts. If you feel like you're hearing gunshots, then start acting like you would if you were 100% sure that they are gunshots, because it's better safe than sorry, right? Don't try to rationalize or be in denial about what it is that you're hearing, because those are precious seconds that could mean the difference between life or death if there is an active shooter situation taking off in the public space where you're at. So understand what gunshots sound like and trust your instincts when you hear them, and go into that evade, barricade, respond mode that we talk about in response to an active shooter. That's your personal defense tip for the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
Do you want increased accuracy and reliability, reduced cleaning time? Well, check out modern Spartan systems. Different chemistry gives you different results. Go to armedlutheran.us/Spartan and order today and help support Armed Lutheran Radio.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I want to talk about FAR targets, and specifically FAR targets that are either clear targets or hardcover targets, not far or distant targets that have non-threats on them, because we need to deal with those a little differently. Okay, so distant or far targets that are wide open or hard-covered, you can do one of two things, basically. You can do 2 slow aimed called shots, or put multiple shots on it at a faster pace. Now, I will say that I have been doing multiple shots in the past couple years, so if I had a 20-yard target or a 25-yard target, I might put extra rounds on it and set up my stage plan so that, and if it required 2, I'd put 3 on it or whatever, so that I'd have some insurance, as a lot of people would call it. But as my shot calling and my technique has improved, my accuracy has improved, I've seen that I get multiple down zeros when I do that. So if I put 3 shots on a 20-yard target, I'll have down 0 out of all 3. So recently I've been kind of trying to do 2 more carefully aimed shots instead of multiple shots. It's kind of hard sometimes to set up your stage plan that way, and because you want to have that insurance, but it's slower. So I've been testing it out, and in IDPA, I believe that 2 aimed or called shots are better than using 3 or more shots, as insurance to try and get your points, or not any extra points on your distant targets. And I found out, especially in a stage plan, it was faster if you were trying to do a mag load and you needed to dump some rounds, to do them on closer targets, because they're closer and you can shoot them faster, so you're not racking up more time. Your times are going to be faster. So like I've said before, go to the range, try them both out. I would say set up like a little mini stage with maybe 3 or 4 targets, and then run it through. Do it one way where you're shooting it with multiple shots, shooting that insurance, and see what your average times are, and then go back and do it multiple times the other way, doing some aimed called shots, just 2 of them, and see what your times are, see what your skill level is at, and make the determination if where you're at you should do 2 called shots or multiple shots and do some insurance. So get out to that practice range and try it out, see what you can do and what you're capable of and what works for you. And as always, keep practicing and getting better. I'm Sergeant Bill, and this has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Hey there, this is Sergeant Bill. After the successful completion of a match, Lloyd and I like to get together and top it off with a celebratory cigar. We get our post-match cigars from Cigar Page, home of America's best cigar deals. Visit armedlutheran.us/cigar and get a great deal. And also, help support Armed Lutheran Radio.
All right, I want to take a minute here to thank our incredible sponsor, Cook's Holsters. They have been with us from day one when this show was just an idea, really, before we even started the podcast. And I was so impressed with Bob Cook and his products that I signed up to become a dealer. I believe in the product so much, I wanted to sell it myself. Cook's Holsters makes custom Kydex holsters for range work, for concealed carry, for competition, inside the waistband, outside the waistband, in a variety of colors and prints and mounting options. Check out the new series of patriotic printed Kydex holsters as well. Those are really cool. And you may be asking yourself, every time you hear me talk about Cook's Holsters, well, what's the big deal? Why should I trust Cook's Holsters when there are so many other Kydex holster makers out there? Listen, Cook's makes the molds and sells printed kydex that many of the other holster manufacturers actually use to build their holsters. This is a great company. This is a great product. They come with a lifetime warranty against defects, 100% satisfaction guarantee, or your money back. Check them out today at cooksholsters.com. Be sure to use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST, that's all one word, and save 10% off your order. Go to cooksholsters.com today. Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Our next guest is an independent journalist whose articles have appeared at The Blaze, FreedomWorks, Newsbusters, and more. He's a documentary producer, a podcaster, and the author of the Amazon bestseller, Stay Away from the Libertarians, and he's the host of a podcast on the Self-Defense Radio Network. Remso Martinez joins us on Armed Lutheran Radio. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get to your book, I really wanted to talk to you about that. But give us a little background. Talk about yourself. Reading your bio, I was surprised at all the different things that you've been involved in. You came out of Liberty University with a degree in government and politics and policy, and then were you thinking of a career in politics or journalism?
Both, and no one would hire me. So I just got really bored real fast and thought, well, if I can't go ahead and develop a portfolio professionally, I might as well do it amateurly, but make it look really good. So that's what I did. After graduating, my brother and I were sitting down in our basement one day, and we thought, how could we make this work? My brother Ryan was the producer for the Remso Republic, and he later became the executive producer for a spin-off series, Haunted Republic. So what he decided to do was he was attending school online while working full-time during the day, and I was a full-time content creator for about 7 months. And during that time, what we basically said was, we only have a finite amount of dollars coming our way and time to get things done before both of us have to realize that we're adults and we should really do adult-like things, be functioning members of society. So what we did was we basically promised ourselves two things. We're going to be open to all opportunities, and we're going to pursue things that we might not get to later in life, whether it was making the podcast, what at one point was number 25 in news and politics for a hot New York minute for the iTunes top charts in North America, to filming a documentary, to going on speaking tours, to doing just a whole bunch of really fun stuff. And that was around the time that I began to conceptualize the idea of writing a book. So we did that for a little while. What we did to pay the bills was we did new media production. So I managed the business relations of things, working primarily with candidates who were running for office to develop really engaging TV, internet, and radio ads for their campaigns. And Ryan would go ahead and handle the technical aspect. And what we did was we used that to fund all of our creative endeavors, hopefully to make some money off of that, but also to give people some really quality content that you get sometimes and sometimes you don't, but we wanted to do it our way with a libertarian flair. So what we did was we basically used that little business that we created to go ahead and fund my journalism and a whole bunch of other things. And life just got real crazy real fast.
Well, you went from doing documentaries about political candidates to a series about paranormal activity to voice work for a radio drama. Talk about how did you get involved in the whole paranormal activity, the Haunted Republic documentary, and I understand you're also doing a TV series called The Witching Hour coming up in the fall.
Yeah, it got really weird, as I mentioned earlier. And when you're open to every opportunity, sometimes you say yes to things that sounds ridiculous at face value. What we were doing was we had a little bit of extra time, but we wanted to go ahead and diversify our audience. We were considering developing a whole multimedia platform where we would have other shows and spin-offs and other things to get away from the political, because as a person that lives and dies all things politics and news, I happen to live in the best place in America, which is Virginia. And I can't tell whether or not God loves us or hates us because we have an election every 7 to 8 months. So what we did was we were watching a show, I think it was Paranormal Lockdown or Ghost Adventures. It's just one of those things that we enjoy watching as a family. It's one of the things that we can get everyone to sit down for. And at one point, I don't know if I had a drink or not, but I started yelling at the TV, and I was just like, you guys are a bunch of fakers. So I looked at my brother Ryan as he was working on something, and Ryan's always taken a much more active interest in the paranormal than I had. And I looked at him, I was like, you think we could do a better show than this? And he looked at me and he said, are we those guys? And I said, no. And he said, well, of course we can make a better show. Let's do it. So we initially did it as kind of a gag to go out and debunk, myths and locations that had these weird stories. And our first film was actually meant to go on a group tour with this one paranormal organization called Ghost Hunts USA. And I wanted to kind of Sacha Baron Cohen them and basically just make the whole thing look ridiculous. And then I've had some crazy experiences happening during that situation. And long story short, now this is what I do for fun in the middle of the night. So we did Haunted Republic while we were doing the Remso Republic as well, since, kind of worked at the branding. And then around the time that the show was ending, I was pursuing my book. Ryan went ahead and spoke to some people at the local public access station, and they were really into the idea of what we were doing, bringing attention to a lot of these places in Virginia, and also the aspect that, we were not out there trying to find just anything that goes bump in the night. We're actual investigators. Like I've actually done like professional journalism. I've done investigative work, and Ryan, he's a very analytical person. He's done some other projects himself. So we have to be objective, and we had our reputations to worry about. So our biggest thing is we put the investigator back in paranormal investigator. And that's how we ended up with our new show, which comes out this fall, The Witching Hour.
And that is that only going to be local access, or is that going to be available streaming somewhere?
It'll be available the day after on YouTube at argosparanormal.com, or you'll just be able to type out Witching Hour on YouTube, and we'll be one of the first people to pop up around that time. I think it's coming out late October.
Very cool. So the geek in me was really interested in this one, and this is the radio drama adaptation of a comic book called Liberty Force. What is that all about?
Liberty Force is one of the most enjoyable things I ever did while I was fun employed, as some of my friends call it, because they never believed that I was actually working. A friend of mine out in Washington State, he did a podcast of his own called the Johnny Rocket Launchpad. And he was, back in the 90s, he was an independent comic book artist. Around 2016, he wanted to kind of get back into that. And he was like, Remso, I want to combine my love of libertarian philosophy with my love of comic books. What should I do? And I said, well, you just gave yourself the answer. You want to go ahead and do a libertarian comic book. So he went ahead and did a comic book, Liberty Force, which is kind of a 1950s space rock drama of sort. Think if Quentin Tarantino went ahead and directed a Flash Gordon reboot, that would basically be the comic. But people were like, this would be really cool if it was like a show. And then we were like, well, unless you're going to go ahead and, say you want to go ahead and subscribe to an online streaming service with a lot of other stuff, so that way we can go ahead and turn it into a cartoon or something. That's not going to happen. But we kept kind of toying around with the idea, because we were like, oh, what if we could do this, all this other stuff? And, the beautiful thing is with podcasting and online radio and everything else, the theater of the mind is a very beautiful thing to go ahead and, mess around with. And, the imagination is just, it's unbound. So Johnny was like, Remso, I know that you've done professional writing and everything else. Would you consider turning the comic book into a radio drama skit? And, as a giant nerd myself, I loved the 1930 Batman radio serials. I love the Flash Gordon serials, the Star Trek serials from the way back when. So I went ahead and took a lot of those themes and wrote the script for that. We voice acted in that along with a bunch of our friends, and that did very well on its own. We were lucky that it came at the resurgence of a lot of radio dramas on iTunes and other stuff. But getting to do that, it's combining things that I love. It was my love of writing, the challenge that came with turning a comic book into a radio drama. There were a lot of things I had to change up so that way it flowed well. Right. And then, just getting to work with two things I love, which is science fiction and libertarian philosophy. So that was a blast.
So how did you originally get started in podcasting? You were on a podcast with Eric Pratt from the GOA at one point, and then what was the timeline between that and Remso Republic?
So around my junior year of college, I really didn't want to go work at Baskin Robbins. So I thought I'd go ahead and get into political consulting. My brother and I Ryan was actually more involved in partisan politics than I had at the time. So we staffed a few campaigns together. And at that point, I had a knack for being able to stretch a dollar and understanding the political landscape thanks to a few opportunities I had prior. So I was working for a couple candidates. One was an independent running for city council. One was a friend of mine who was running in a Republican primary out in Alabama. And the thing I learned real fast was that a lot of the media outlets, and tell me if I'm shocking you with this, I certainly hope that I'm not the first person to tell you this, the media likes to lie and they're not objective.
No.
It really bugs me too.
The heck
really,
you say?
Yeah, I mean, it really bugged me too. And I realized real fast that you could have a great candidate with a great message, but if people don't get out to the polls because they don't know you or they don't believe in you, nothing else is going to matter.
Yep.
And an old boss of mine, Matt Kibbe, who was the president and founder of Freedom Works at the time, he went ahead and always emphasized with us this quote by Andrew Breitbart. And the quote was, "Politics is downstream of culture." And I realized very fast, I'm losing all these campaigns. The deck is stacked against me. What can I do? Well, I already know how to turn nothing into something, and I have a bit of a personality that gets attention, whether good or bad. It's for the listeners to decide on that. So I started the podcast with Ryan as the producer, and it was the Remso Republic. And the idea was to go ahead and bring attention to issues and individuals that are discussing topics that we ourselves in our regular life might be talking about, but you're not necessarily going to find this content elsewhere. And it went on for about 150 plus episodes. We had some amazing people on. We had Dr. Ron Paul for our last episode. We had everyone from actors, comedians, writers, journalists, politicians, comic book artists, prostitutes. I mean, we had everyone. I mean, everyone was welcome, and we had a rock and roll time with that. So that around that time, that really helped boost my profile, so to speak. Started getting into some public speaking. Started getting more writing opportunities. I'm a regular contributor for a site called redtea.com, where I talk a lot about crypto economics and other issues from a libertarian perspective. And around that time, a friend of mine who I went to Liberty with, he became the communications director for Gun Owners of America. And around that time, we had the Vegas shooting and a whole bunch of other terrible things occur. Mm-hmm. It seemed like a lot of Second Amendment organizations were just willing to constantly concede certain principles and concepts to the progressive gun grabbers. So he went ahead and pitched an idea to his boss, which was to bring me on to produce and co-host their own podcast, which was essentially a volume type of series where every 4 episodes was a specific topic and each episode was a chapter in that. Podcasting was great, but I knew that one day I really wanted to get into film to tell a story. And about 5 months after directing the first volume of Gun Owners of America Firing Back, I went ahead and solo directed and produced a mini documentary called American Statesman about a friend of mine who's a delegate from Culpeper, Virginia, named Nick Freitas. Luckily, around the time that my documentary had come out, I had done it just because I wanted to test out filming. Later, it came out as a big thing. And I do like to consider myself a bit of a cultural Forrest Gump. I don't know how I get into certain situations, but what I do know is that when they come, I might as well enjoy it while it's there.
You talk about your brother a lot. Is politics, is this a family thing? And where does this interest in politics that you and your brother share, where did that come from? Did that come from your parents, or does that just...
We just really don't like taxes, Lloyd. Like, that sounds like a cop-out, but, like, we really, really hate taxes. Yeah, it's always awkward when you gotta explain to your girlfriend that you've got this side chick named FICA that takes half your crap. Yeah, so, the thing, the question kind of popped out at us, are we going to do something to try and lower our taxes? And, while no one really loves politics, I mean, no one's in it because they love it. They're in it because, it's a mean to an end of itself. It was like, well, I guess I got to go ahead and pretend to like these people and do all this other stuff and vote in the lobby and get people active. And, it just spun into a personal crusade because ultimately, we, from my mom's side of the family, my mom's part Korean. Her mother and her grandmother escaped the communists in Korea, and my father, he essentially grew up in abject poverty in Puerto Rico, moved to Orlando when he was about 11 years old, didn't even speak English. And, both my parents are incredibly successful people. And what I learned growing up, traveling around the country and around the world, I spent a few years in Australia, was if you don't have the individual freedom to chart out the course of your own destiny, what do you really have? And when you spend your life creating something and other people feel like, they deserve what you create, I mean, that's called theft.
Yep.
That's just outright theft.
And you've got a very interesting, with your family background, you've got a very interesting insight into the American dream. Your parents came here with nothing and made something out of themselves and did it the right way. So I would assume you've got some interesting thoughts on the current fight over immigration.
Well, first, I just want to point out, like, the FAFSA and affirmative action had no clue what the hell to do with me. Secondly, I got into a bit of a tiff with somebody about this recently. There was a Lyft driver out in California who had been deported several times and ended up killing 2 American citizens. A friend of mine shared the article online, and somebody said, "Oh, so you're sharing an anti-immigrant article?" To which I replied, "That man wasn't an immigrant. He was an invader from outside of our border who came in and murdered 2 Americans."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it gets as simple as that. If I do ever do another, politically related documentary, it's going to be with a couple friends of mine breaking into Mexico to show just how open borders friendly and tolerant they are towards illegal immigrants. I mean, I grew up in a small town for a few years before we started moving around constantly called Sierra Vista in Arizona. And, you could spit off my front porch and hit Mexico. Mm-hmm. And, for the most part, and this is before the cartels became really, really bad, but, people used to come in and people from Mexico would come in, they'd work, and then they'd go home. And some of them would stay here, but they weren't here and they weren't a complete drain on our resources. They weren't taking advantage of the welfare state. I don't have a problem with people moving across borders for work as long as it's temporary. It's when they come here and they become part of the looter state itself, and then they expect me to go ahead and turn over some of my rights so that way they can continue to be criminals. Like, that just makes no sense.
Agreed.
It just makes no sense at all.
Yep.
Like, I was very, like, I was a bit of a never Trumper for a while. I was against the wall, but I went out to Arizona last year to see my grandmother, and I took my girlfriend with me, and just seeing what happened in the town, like, half of the Huachuca Mountains, like, the cops have signs everywhere that say, once you go past this point, the U.S. government cannot guarantee your protection. And I was like, well, that's not Mexico. And people are like, yeah, that's still part of us, but it might as well be Mexico. And I'm like, holy crap. If I have to pay 10 cents more for a tomato to build a wall so an American can live, like, that's not the worst thing that's ever been done.
No. If we can give $150 billion to Iran, we can surely come up with a few bucks for a wall.
Yeah, and I'm all, people are like, oh, well, is it going to be a giant wall? And I'm like, man, it could be whatever you want, and I'm open to any ideas. We could put an alligator moat, put some drones out there, put a driving range so people could get randomly hit with golf balls as they're passing the Rio Grande. I mean, the sky's the limit with that. The U.S. government loves to spend things. You might as well spend money on ourselves instead of unconstitutionally throwing it to people that burn our flag and then use it to cause massive attacks on unarmed civilians and innocent people throughout the world. I mean, if I got to compromise on statism, I might as well do something that benefits me in that case.
Good point. So what is so let's talk about you've recently released this book. It's done very well on Amazon. It's called Stay Away from the Libertarians. Give us a little background on the book, what motivated you to write it, and what's the story behind the title?
So there was a meme I saw online about a year ago, and it's a 3-panel comic strip, so to speak, and it's of this mother and her son that are walking down the street, and the son points ahead and he says, "Look, Mommy, libertarians." And the second panel shows a close-up of the mother's face, and she's like, no, Ricky, don't look at them. I don't want you to be influenced by there. And before she could finish that sentence, she's like, oh, God, no, please, no. And you scroll down and you see the kid with a little anarchist bow tie and a Ron Paul shirt. And he's like, no victim, no crime, end the Fed. Taxation is theft. It's too late, mother. I've seen everything. And the mother's just screaming, no, my God, no. And honestly, like, that's basically my mother and my in my relationship with my mother basically summed up in a comic strip, because my mother's very traditionally conservative Republican. And, right. I was the one screaming for a lot of other things where she was like, how are you my child? And it was really funny, because that's a very similar experience that many other people that come to the philosophy of liberty really begin to understand. You're an outlier. A lot of the things that you're going to go ahead and say, it just doesn't really jive with the left-right spectrum or the two-party system. It really kind of bucks the whole notion of what we've been able to conceive as a society, a culture, and a state. So the thing that you had a lot of in terms of just books and articles, we had a lot of people that are trying to rewrite Murray Rothbard's For a New Liberty. It's a new libertarian manifesto every year. But, no one's going to read that because they think that you want to go ahead and put crack cocaine vending machines in daycare centers. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go ahead and add to the movement, add to the conversation a lot of people are already having by just addressing a lot of these libertarian stereotypes. Are we all just a bunch of moral relativists? Do we want open borders? What's the libertarian view on government? Why are we just a bunch of Ayn Rand cult followers? So right. I wanted to go ahead and address all of those things, but I'm a natural storyteller. So I went ahead and covered all these major libertarian stereotypes through a narrative. And the narrative is my coming to being a libertarian. So a lot of these points are things that I've encountered in my own life. And I went ahead and, gave these answers through my own personal stories. So that was the premise of the book. And what really shocked me was that I really intended for this to be a very academic piece. Mm-hmm. I wanted it to be in the the social criticism, news and events, political science section of Amazon. And everyone kept telling me, no, Remso, it goes in the political humor section, which I think worked out for me because I got as high as to number 10 in political humor my first week. Nice. And, everyone keeps telling me how funny it is. And I'm just like, yeah, but did you learn something from it? Which they all say they do. But, ultimately it worked out. And my biggest thing is I'm not trying to convert more people to become libertarians, but what I did want to do was I wanted to go ahead and provide a face to the faceless libertarian hordes and swarms you see online to show you that, listen, the libertarians, they're just these wacky people that have this radical notion that you shouldn't hurt people, you shouldn't take their stuff, and you shouldn't use the government as a violent middleman. And that's the premise behind Stay Away from the Libertarians.
So without giving away too much of the book, give us a couple of these stereotypes that you try to debunk in the book.
Okay, one chapter, there's chapter 4. It's called Put the Kitten Down. There's this radical, and I actually take offense to this, there's this stereotype that libertarians are simply, I call it the Gary Johnson answer, socially liberal, fiscally conservative. So basically what you are is you're a very staunch centrist, you're a moderate. And, as a student of political science, there's nothing more I hate than a political sociopath, which is what all moderates are, or they're liberals that don't like to, hang around other Democrats very often. But, I named it Put the Kitten Down because while I was at Liberty University, we had this guy in our class who we nicknamed a Liberty's token Democrat, even though he wasn't. We just like to poke fun at him. But, he liked to describe himself as a moderate. And then my John Kasich clubbing friend of all people looked at him and he pulled him aside and said, you know what, bud, I've got a story for you. You've got these two folks, okay? They're arguing and this other guy walks over to them. And he sees the one guy holding a blender in one hand, and in the other hand, he's holding a kitten. And the guy standing across from him is like, man, you cannot blend that kitten. And then you have the guy holding the blender and the kitten, and he says, no, I want to blend the entire kitten. So the guy that just walked over the situation, he looks at the guy that said, don't blend the kitten, and he said, how dare you take such an outrageous right-wing stance on an issue. I'm going to go ahead and tell this guy just to blend half the kitten because he sounds reasonable. And then when the guy saying, you can't blend kittens, the kitten's alive, starts yelling, the moderate goes ahead and looks at the guy who's about to blend the kitten, completely destroy it. And he says, you know what, you didn't yell at me. Please go ahead and blend the kitten because I don't want to seem radical. So here's a question in all of this. Who's the libertarian in that situation? The cat.
The cat is the libertarian.
The cat is the libertarian.
Just leave me alone.
Just leave me alone. Like the cat had no say. The cat was just there and he's like, man, just get the hell off of me. And he didn't have a voice because no one listened to him.
I like it.
So Kitty Liberty got blended, and the moderate let it happen. Because, I mean, that's, on a more serious note, like libertarianism is not radical centrism. It has its own core beliefs based off the values of non-aggression and natural rights. And when you go ahead and you delve into classical liberal theory, people such as Robert Nozick, John Stuart Mill, Adam Smith, et cetera, et cetera. My favorite is Frederick Bastiat, of course, who wrote The Law. It's a philosophy based off of raw freedom, of individual responsibility. And that really goes, it shares certain parts of, I would say somewhat the neo-progressive movement and traditional conservative, but sometimes it also goes against it in some ways. And it really is its own, it has its own legs to stand on, whereas moderates, I mean, they are really political sociopaths. They change on every other issue. They have contradicting stances that really don't make sense, and they have no core belief.
People have had a hard time sort of taking the Libertarian Party particularly seriously, or libertarians in general, because you tend to get these sort of milquetoast candidates, the Gary Johnsons. They are typically associated with drug or pot legalization is the big thing, candidates stripping themselves naked at conventions, and old guys who drone on about monetary policy. Do you see that that sort of stereotype, that picture that people have in their minds of libertarians when they hear the word? Do you see that changing?
Yes and no, and I'm going to cover that question in two parts. The first one is the stereotypes you threw out at me. Yeah, those are bad. And I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party. I do talk about the history of the Libertarian Party in the book and what led to these, assumptions of Libertarian Party officials and candidates and members, et cetera. But, the one thing I tell people when they go ahead and throw that out there, it's like, yeah, we have some potheads, some guys arguing about the Fed and the stripper at our convention. I mean, for one, at least our conventions have strippers. And when I say our, I mean, I'm speaking, figuratively. But one thing I tell them is, when was the last time a libertarian infringed on one of your rights? When was the last time a libertarian advocated to take something from you? When was the last time anyone died because of a libertarian policy? When was the last time I took your son, sent him to a meat grinder in the Middle East and said he died for your freedom? When in fact, the only people that have had their freedom stomped on are us. Libertarians have really done nothing to, infringe upon the well-being of your life. In fact, they've always gone ahead and said the only person that is best to make decisions for you is you. There is no one singular libertarian. There's a core belief based off non-aggression and radical individualism. But, for me, like I'm an active believer. I have my faith in Christ, but I'm a very socially traditional conservative person. And that really freaks some people out because they're like, well, how can you be that in a libertarian? And my thing is, my beliefs extend to me, and I'm going to go ahead and try and convince you, if I want to convince you to believe what I believe, through rhetoric and discussion and discourse. It won't be through coercion, force, or violence. And that is all statism ever really is, because I'm of the firm belief that if your ideas are good, they don't require force or violence in order to convince people. And I think the biggest thing we're going to see right now, and we saw this during the latter end of the Obama years, is, I think there's a natural union between libertarians and conservatives, but I think there's a big problem with both of them. I think that conservatives need to understand and adapt a full-on libertarian view of the state, which is no matter who you have in charge, the state is a system of violence and power, and that should be limited to ensure and guarantee the protection of natural rights of all individuals. So conservatives need a libertarian view of government. And for libertarians, what they also need to understand is that, there are some absolute answers. And the thing is that, countries are more than just self-sustained economies, they're entire cultures. Libertarians need to adopt a conservative view of civil society. For what helps the individual be strong, a strong family? What helps a strong family? A good community. What helps a good community? Organizations of voluntary cooperation, churches, civil institutions, a respect for common law. When libertarians, adopt a conservative view of civil society and conservatives adopt a libertarian view of the government, I think we'll see some radical revolutionary things happen for the betterment of all mankind. But until that begins to be taken a little bit more seriously, I think we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Give us your thoughts on the November election coming up. At one point, we were hearing all this talk about how the anti-Trump sentiment in the country was supposed to be, setting the stage for a sweep for Democrats, a blue wave. Do you see that happening now? I'm not sure that I see that.
Oh, no. And, I try and take things from the political scientist and look at historical data. And then there's a part of me where I kind of give you my gut reaction. The historical data shows that the midterm election, after every general election in which there's been a changeover in which party has control of the government, you'll typically see the reverse of that happen in the midterms as a check. So historically, a blue wave is expected just as much as a red wave was expected in 2010. My gut reaction says that the Democrats are doing the greatest thing possibly for Republicans, which is be as stupid as possible. When you have people of your own party that are basically saying, "I'm going to walk away from you," this is pretty beautiful. And you go ahead and look at the president's approval ratings; they're in the mid 60s to 70s. Despite what the fake news will go ahead and tell you, you go ahead and you look at the tax cuts, you look at everything else. I mean, Americans are richer, healthier, and happier. And Democrats, their approval ratings are going, beneath that of roaches, alligators, and AIDS. So, I see them gaining some seats. I mean, at worst, they gain the House. But, as a libertarian, like a gridlock government isn't the worst thing that can happen. That just means that they're so busy bickering because nothing can get done. That means they're not crafting laws or legislation that can harm my freedom or take more of my money.
I really thought after the way 2016 went and the shock of, losing to Trump of all people, that the Democrats would change their tune, at least present themselves differently, moderate the way they present themselves. Maybe not moderate how they legislate, but at least present themselves in a more in a way that's more palatable to the majority of Americans. But they've done the exact opposite.
Yeah, I mean, they're one bad day of having a giant rally where they smear themselves with their own feces. I mean, these are people who fundamentally, they're, I had a professor that talked about the two-circle diagram to explain worldview, where you see yourself right now in your present reality and where you see yourself in terms of the universe. The small circle is you, where you see yourself right now, and then the big circle is where you see yourself in the universe. As Christians, we know that we're individuals who belong and are obedient and should serve the God of the universe, and that the state is just an institution that's there because man is flawed. With the liberal, despite what they claim to believe, their salvation, their every redeeming factor in the world comes from the state. The state is their God. And they serve at the altar of cultural Marxism. 1,000 years ago, people in the Americas were sacrificing their children because they wanted the sun. Now we sacrifice our money and we still sacrifice children because if not, you're a racist bigot. So, they can't handle living in a reality where they have to think to themselves, maybe I'm wrong.
So who do you see as, we heard this week that, Biden is thinking about running again. What do you see happening in 2020? Prognosticate a little. Get your crystal ball out for us, and what do you see happening on the Democrat side facing Trump in 2020?
It's like the Sinister Six movie that Fox Studios shot down. You've got Kamala Harris, Mad Maxine, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and probably Hillary Clinton again. Because if it's not broke, break it some more. Like, Trump is going to have such a walk through the park. This is just going to be funny. It's like watching a WWE match. Like, I know that you want probably a much more sophisticated answer, but, I think we've been touching on it throughout this discussion. They're just doubling down on stupid. They're not doing anything that actually benefits people. And knowing them, they might actually call for a civil war if they think they might lose. Like, we're dealing with people who literally worship at the altar of the state. This is why you have blue dog Democrats that are coming out and they're saying, you know what? I'm a dude, and dudes should not walk into a chick's restroom, and I'm tired of this. And leave Cole alone, damn it. Like, come on. This makes literally no sense. I live right outside of D.C. I've seen naked people, I've seen dudes snort cocaine off metro seats. I've seen a lot of crazy, unexplainable stuff that I could show you pictures of, and you'd probably think, well, this doesn't happen in America. It does. People are donating money to Kylie Jenner, Kim Kardashian's sister, so that way she could become the first millennial billionaire in all of history. Yet we're complaining about living wages? How about give me some money? Come on. That's all I got to say about that.
Well said. So what's next for you've got the podcast is sort of in hiatus. So you said not completely out of the question that it might come back or something like it, but you got the book doing well. What, and of course the show, The Witching Hour, coming up in October, I think you said. What else is on the horizon for you? What are you looking forward to? I'm
looking forward to the day where I never have to talk about politics again because no one cares who's in charge.
Oh, that would be so nice.
Until then, I'm going to continue my writing. You can go ahead and catch all my work at rwmartinez.com. I'm also a regular contributor for redtea.com. I recently did start off my own side business called Champion Pundit Academy, where I'll be launching some how-to courses on punditry and commentary, how to write a book, vlog, podcast, and so many other courses such as Art of the Candidate. So you can go ahead and check out my other website, championpundit.com. We'll be launching courses this fall. And I am in the processing stage of considering doing another book. I think I've caught the writer's bug, so might as well write before I go senile one day, or an alcoholic, whichever comes first. And I've got a lot of things coming up, but when you're open to everything becomes weird and part of your life real fast, so you might as well enjoy it.
He is Remso Martinez. He is the author of the new book. It's a bestseller on Amazon, Stay Away from the Libertarians. Look for a link in the show notes to get your copy today. Remso, thanks for taking the time to visit with us.
Sir, it was a blast. Anytime, I'm welcome. Just go ahead and hit me up.
You're welcome anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.